What's up guys, my name is Ace, and today I wanted to explore the topic of guns and weapon mods releasing a bit on the weaker side in Black Ops 6. That seems to be the trend we've been seeing, especially with Season 2. I did want to look at the pros and cons of this approach and compare it to the approach that they took last year with Modern Warfare 3, which was a very different approach, by the way. And then toward the end, I wanted to share my thoughts on where I feel they should be taking this going forward. So let's have a little recap of all of the new weapons and weapon mods we've been getting since the launch of Season 2. None of them have really been standouts in my opinion. I would say the best out of all of them has been the PPSH. I would consider it to be quite a good SMG. It fits in nicely with the other SMGs, but I definitely wouldn't call it like the best SMG in the game now. It's just a very solid SMG that I think fits in nicely. Then with the Cypher 91, I personally consider that one to be below average for assault rifles. It's not that it's terrible or totally unusable, like I can use it and find success with it, but compared to the other assault rifles, there's really no situation where I would rather have the Cypher 91 in my hands than one of the other assault rifles in the game, because the gun simply has a slow time to kill and slow fire rate, making it a high risk, below average reward weapon. Then with the Fang 82 LMG, I'm personally just not a big fan of it, and the stats on it back that up. It feels like a bad hybrid of an LMG and assault rifle. Like, it seems like it's trying to be an LMG assault rifle hybrid, but it's taking too many of the downsides from the LMG category, which means that if I want an LMG, I'm better off with any of the other LMGs, and if I want an assault rifle, I'm better off with any of the assault rifles, and that kind of leaves the Fang 82 in a weird spot. Again, I'm not going to call it totally unusable or anything, but I don't think it's very good. Then for weapon mods, with the AEK full auto mod, I do think this one was quite a good addition to the game. It is unique, but it does have a decent amount of limitations and downsides attached to it, preventing it from becoming anywhere close to a top tier choice in this game. And then finally, with the Tonto 22 binary trigger mod, like I said in my breakdown video, I actually really like this weapon mod because it performs unlike anything else in the game. It's very unique and fun to use. And while I think it is decent and it can hold its own just fine if you play to its strengths, at the end of the day, I do consider it to be just a little bit worse than the base Tonto 22. So as we can see, out of all of these guns and weapon mods, none of them have really become like top tier weapons or weapons that you see people going to on a very regular basis outside of just unlocking the camos and leveling them up. And when we contrast that with last year with Modern Warfare 3, while I do remember at the beginning they were doing a similar thing, many of the new guns and aftermarket parts, especially within that launch window or within like the first season, most of them were pretty underwhelming and not really all that exciting to use. But from what I remember, starting in about Season 2 to Season 3, this is when they really ramped things up, and it seems like they shifted their philosophy entirely, especially when it came to the aftermarket parts that were coming to the game. And from then on, there was a tendency for new aftermarket parts or new weapons to be top tier meta guns when they first came to the game. And then oftentimes they were so good, they ended up having to nerf them and tone them down not too long after they launched. Whereas this year, with Black Ops 6, Treyarch really seems to be aiming to not disrupt weapon balance at all with their new additions. And instead, they're just aiming to keep the new weapons and the new weapon mods average to slightly below average, but still usable. And I think no matter which approach they take, it's going to be met with some opposition because there are different groups in the community that want different things. I know a lot of people were unhappy with how they handled things in Modern Warfare 3, where they would launch things really powerful and then have to nerf them a little while after. Right now, there's people that are unhappy with how Black Ops 6 is handling it. They think that the guns are just boring and too weak. And I do think both sides have valid points. So I wanted to talk about the pros and cons of this a little bit before sharing my final thoughts and opinions on this. And let's first talk about the pros of doing what Treyarch is currently doing right now, which is launching new items in a non-disruptive state, so balanced or maybe slightly on the weaker side to play it safe. And the first big upside with this approach is consistency. When you do this, it's really easy to keep up with weapons long term, as the weapon meta isn't constantly changing and the new weapons aren't killing the effectiveness of the existing guns in the game. So if you're somebody that plays really casually, let's just say you take a month break from the game. If you've been away for a month in Black Ops 6 and you came back right now, your favorite gun from a month ago is going to be just as good and fit into the exact same spot in the meta as it did a month ago. And a lot of people like that consistency, rather than coming back to the game after a break and suddenly their favorite gun just feels like crap relative to everything else that's in the game. There's also little to no power creep by taking this approach. The overall ease of use of the weapons doesn't get better. The average time to kill in gunfights doesn't get faster and faster as new guns come out, to the point where months later the gameplay is almost unrecognizable from the past because you're dying so much quicker and the guns are so much more accurate and all the old guns just get left in the dust. You're not going to see that with this approach that Treyarch has been taking. Additionally, I think it can be a bit frustrating when they launch new items very, very powerful only to then have to nerf them a week or two later. The issue with this is it can often feel like they're pulling a bait and switch on you by trying to get you invested with either your time or your money to get the new exciting weapon or weapon mod in the game, only to then nerf it a week or two later so that thing that you were grinding for or maybe even paid real money for to get a bundle for it, it's no longer what it was when you decided that you wanted to get that item. And then finally, I think many would agree that at least on paper, balance is inherently something that you should be aiming for with an FPS game. It ensures that a wide variety of items are going to be viable, which should, in theory, improve gameplay variety, so you're not just stuck using the same 3 to 5 meta guns that are head and shoulders above everything else in the game. And based on what we've been seeing, I really think that's what Treyarch's goal is with this. Now, in saying that, even though there are definitely some pros to this approach, there are some cons to it as well. And I think the downsides of taking this safe, non-disruptive approach are, first up, the new items are just far less exciting to earn and use. And it gets to the point where many players just don't care about them at all. They don't bother unlocking them because maybe they have very limited playtime, and why would they invest it when they know that that item's just average to below average? Or for many others, they will unlock the items, they'll grind out the levels, they'll grind out the camos, and then they'll never touch the gun again because it's just not worth using relative to the other items. So for those players, it may bring like a few hours of something new and different to play with, but that's it. It doesn't offer anything long-term for them. And after those few hours of grinding out the gun, the game just goes right back to playing exactly the same as it was for them previously because they're not going back to use these new items. And having less excitement over time is likely going to be bad for player retention. If they keep bringing new things to the game and just about every time they bring something new, your response is, oh, that new thing is all right. It's not bad, but it's also not great. That's obviously not going to get you nearly as excited to log in and play the game as, wow, this new gun is amazing. I really want to use this a lot. And not just to get the camos, I want to keep using it once I've got all the camos unlocked. That seems more like the response I would want to see if I were creating a game. Additionally, a downside of taking this safe approach is the weapon meta, well, perhaps balanced overall, which I think it is. I think Black Ops 6 has a very balanced weapon meta overall. You can use quite a wide variety of weapons and still be quite competitive. It hasn't really changed at all, and it can get stale if nothing ever disrupts this meta, if the meta never changes, and therefore the gameplay experience doesn't really evolve nearly as much over time. When you have a weapon meta that evolves over time, I find it can make things more interesting and memorable long term, as long as it's handled well, of course. There are limits to this, which I will talk about when I'm sharing my opinions on this. And then finally, another downside of taking this approach isn't so much for the players, but for the business side of things. If you're launching a new gun or a weapon mod alongside a blueprint for that gun, or a blueprint that includes that weapon mod on it, it seems like you're probably not going to sell nearly as many of those bundles if people aren't really all that interested in using that new gun or that new weapon mod. Why would they spend real money on something that's really flashy if they know that they're not even planning on using it much beyond maybe unlocking camos? So like I said, I definitely see both sides to this. I think there are valid points on both ends. And again, at this point, I don't think you can please everybody in the community since there are different sides to this. But when it comes to my personal opinions on this, I think Treyarch has been hitting the mark that they've set for themselves, which is balance and not disrupting the meta. I think some level of disruption would be good as well. I don't think they've been way off the mark so far by bringing in a bunch of totally useless weapons or weapon mods. Almost all of these have been at least decent or somewhat usable, and I've enjoyed my time with many of them. But at the same time, I wouldn't be opposed to them dialing up some of their future additions a little bit, just to make them a bit more exciting. I also think the game overall, not just with weapon balancing, it has been feeling a bit stale. So mixing things up with that weapon meta, introducing a new gun that disrupts that weapon meta a bit, wouldn't hurt things with the game right now. Now, at the same time, of course, there are limits to what I'd want to see here. I'm not saying that I want to see them add blatantly overpowered weapons to the point where nothing else, at least in that weapon category, can reliably compete, and then that is the only gun you end up seeing. We saw that a few times actually last year with Modern Warfare 3, where they would add an aftermarket part, like the BP-50 SMG kit, if you guys played and remembered that. That gun totally took over the game for, I think, a couple weeks, if I remember correctly, because it was better than all of the SMGs and assault rifles in nearly every situation in the game, so why wouldn't you be using it? There were basically no downsides attached to it. I don't want to see that. I don't want to see them go so far to the point where it's obvious that they're just going to have to nerf it a week or two later as well. But essentially what I want to see here is not on the extremes, but instead of aiming for average to slightly below average for new additions to the game, I would like to see them go for average to slightly above average. So if we're looking at a scale from 1 to 10, 1 being completely terrible, practically unusable, 10 being totally overpowered, I think at the moment they're kind of aiming for a 4 to 5. They're playing it safe with that. I'd much rather see them aim for like a 5 to 7 on that scale when it comes to new additions to the game. So they would still be within the realm of being somewhat balanced. It wouldn't totally take over the game, but it would disrupt the meta a little bit. It would mix things up. It would have some more incentive for long-term use for those items as well. We're not taking it up to a 9 or a 10, so it doesn't have to be immediately nerfed. It's not going to take over the game entirely, but at least it's going to have some more excitement to it. That, I think, would be the sweet spot, at least for me. But of course, that's just my opinion. And I'd love to hear what you guys think about this in those comments down below. Have you been happy with the approach that Treyarch has been using here, which is playing it a bit safe with new items, where they're usually average to slightly below average? Or would you like to see them ramp this up? And if so, how much would you like to see them ramp this up? You could even use that scale of 1 to 10 I brought out. Where would you like new guns to fall on average on that scale? Do you want them to be better than average or not? Just let me know down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated. And don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.